In 1719, the streets of Paris witnessed something unprecedented. Peasants were buying carriages. Servants were purchasing estates. A hunchbacked man was offered 150,000 livres by noblewomen desperate to marry him. Not for love, but because he worked for the right company. Within 18 months, France would produce more millionaires than the rest of Europe combined. And within 24 months, those same millionaires would be burning paper money in the streets just to stay warm. This is the story of how one man, a convicted murderer, a gambler, and a mathematical genius, convinced an entire kingdom that wealth could be created from nothing. That prosperity didn't require gold, silver, or labor, just belief. His name was John Law, and for one brief, intoxicating moment, he was right. Welcome to the Wealth Timeline, where we uncover how money, power, and history are woven together to shape the world we live in. Today, we're traveling back to 18th century France to witness the birth of modern finance and its most catastrophic failure. The year is 1715. King Louis XIV, the Sun King, has just died after a 72-year reign that left France dazzling on the surface and hollowed out beneath. Versailles gleamed with gold leaf and crystal chandeliers, but the treasury was empty. The national debt had ballooned to 3 billion livres, roughly 3 times the kingdom's annual revenue. Tax collectors were ambushed on country roads. Bread riots erupted in provincial towns. The currency was debased so many times that merchants refused to accept it. France, the most powerful nation in Europe, was functionally bankrupt. Into this chaos stepped Philippe II, Duke of Orléans, the regent who would rule until Louis XIX came of age. Philippe was cultured, intelligent, and desperate. He needed a miracle. What he got was John Law. But who was this mysterious figure who would promise to save France? And why would a foreign gambler be given control over an entire nation's economy? To understand that, we need to go back to where it all began. John Law was born in Edinburgh in 1671, the son of a goldsmith and banker. From childhood, he displayed an uncanny gift for mathematics, particularly probability theory, the dark art of calculating risk and reward. At 17, he joined his father's banking house. At 23, he killed a man in a duel over a woman and was sentenced to hang. He escaped prison and fled to Amsterdam, where he discovered something that would change his life forever. The Dutch had invented something extraordinary: paper money backed not by gold in a vault, but by future economic activity. They had central banks, credit systems, joint stock companies whose shares traded on exchanges, and they had grown wealthy beyond measure. Law became obsessed. He studied the mechanics of money, credit, and financial systems with the intensity of an alchemist seeking the philosopher's stone. And slowly, he developed a theory. Gold and silver, Law argued, were barbaric relics. They limited economic growth because their supply was fixed by geology, not by human need. But paper money, backed by land, trade, or future revenues, could expand to match economic activity. Credit could create wealth that didn't exist before. It was revolutionary. It was brilliant. And it contained within it the seeds of catastrophe. For the next 20 years, Law wandered Europe like a financial prophet, pitching his system to kings and ministers. Scotland rejected him. Italy dismissed him. Austria laughed him out of Vienna. But France was desperate enough to listen. The birth of the system. In 1716, John Law stood before the regent Philippe and made an audacious proposal. He would establish a private bank, the Banque Générale, that would issue paper notes convertible to silver. These notes would be accepted for tax payments, giving them instant credibility. The bank would provide credit to merchants and manufacturers, stimulating trade. As the economy grew, so would tax revenues, allowing France to service its debt. Philippe, with few alternatives, agreed. The Banque Générale opened for business in May 1716. And almost immediately, something extraordinary happened. The notes held their value. In fact, they traded above their nominal worth because, unlike royal coins which were constantly debased, Law's notes were reliable. Merchants preferred them. Trade expanded. The French economy, which had been suffocating under debt and monetary chaos, began to breathe again. Law had proven his theory worked, but this was only the beginning. In 1717, Law took his next step. He acquired a failing colonial venture called the Mississippi Company, which held trading monopolies in French Louisiana, a vast territory spanning from the Gulf of Mexico to Canada. On paper, Louisiana was worthless swampland. But in Law's vision, it was an empire waiting to be unlocked. He launched a marketing campaign of staggering audacity. Pamphlets flooded Paris describing Louisiana's gold mines, emerald mountains, and fertile plains where crops grew year-round. Indigenous peoples were depicted as eager trading partners. Rivers teemed with fish. The climate was paradise. None of it was true. Law had never set foot in Louisiana. But truth was irrelevant. What mattered was belief. And France believed. By 1719, Law had consolidated nearly all of France's overseas trade into his company. He acquired the Compagnie des Indes, the China Company, the Senegal Company. He took over the Royal Mint. He assumed management of tax collection. The Mississippi Company wasn't just a business. It was becoming the French state itself. In August 1719, Law went public with a massive share offering. The response was volcanic. Shares originally priced at 500 livres shot to 1,000, then 2,000, then 5,000. Crowds besieged Law's residence on the Rue de Quincampoix, a narrow street that became the world's first stock exchange. People camped overnight for the chance to buy shares. A hunchbacked man who worked as a clerk at Law's Banque became a millionaire by renting out his hump as a writing desk to traders desperate to sign purchase orders. Servants mortgaged their futures. Nobles sold ancestral estates. A new word entered the French language: millionaire. In January 1720, Law was appointed Controller General of Finances, the equivalent of Prime Minister of the economy. A Scottish exile, a former fugitive, now controlled the wealth of France. The shares peaked at 10,000 livres, a 2,000% increase in 18 months. France was rich. The debt was under control. The economy was booming. But this power came with a cost that no one yet understood. The architecture of collapse. The Mississippi system, as it became known, rested on a brilliant but fatal architecture. Law's Banque issued paper money to buy government debt. That money flowed into Mississippi Company shares, driving prices up. As share prices rose, people felt wealthier and spent more, stimulating the economy. Economic growth justified issuing more currency. The cycle fed itself. It was a perpetual motion machine of prosperity. But it violated the most fundamental law of physics. You cannot create energy from nothing. The first crack appeared in February 1720, when a prince of royal blood decided to cash out. He arrived at Law's Banque with millions in notes, demanding conversion to gold. Law, cornered, had to honor the request. But doing so revealed an uncomfortable truth. The bank didn't have enough gold to back all the notes in circulation. Word spread through the Parisian elite like poison in a bloodstream. If the bank couldn't convert notes to specie, what were the notes actually worth? And if the notes were suspect, what were the shares, purchased with those same notes, really worth? In March, Law made his fatal mistake. To stop the bleeding, he announced that both the notes and the shares would be devalued by 50% over the coming months. He believed this would gently deflate the bubble, allowing a soft landing. Instead, it triggered panic. If the government itself was declaring the currency and shares would lose half their value, why would anyone hold them? The psychology reversed instantly. The stampede began. Law rescinded the order within days, but the damage was done. Confidence, the invisible substance on which his entire system depended, had evaporated. By May, share prices were in free fall. By autumn, they had collapsed to below their original offering price. The paper money that had seemed so miraculous was now fuel for fires. Shops refused it. Peasants demanded payment in grain or silver. France had gone from boom to bust in 9 months. But the truly devastating realization was yet to come. The wealth had never existed at all. The collapse of the Mississippi system didn't just destroy fortunes. It shattered the social fabric of France. Families who had sold land to buy shares found themselves homeless. Nobles who had mortgaged estates ended up destitute. Merchants who had expanded their businesses on credit went bankrupt overnight. The new millionaires, valets, coachmen, servants, discovered their wealth had been an accounting illusion. Riots erupted in Paris. Crowds besieged Law's residence, calling for his head. The regent, facing revolution, had no choice. In December 1720, John Law fled France in disguise, abandoning his palace, his fortune, and the wreckage of his dream. He would spend the rest of his life wandering Europe, a pariah whose name became synonymous with fraud. He died in Venice in 1729, broke and largely forgotten. But the damage he left behind would shape France for generations. The royal government repudiated most of the debt tied to Law's system, effectively defaulting on obligations to its own citizens. The Banque was dissolved. Paper money was banned for decades. France retreated to a metallic currency system, strangling credit and economic growth for the next 60 years. The trauma ran deeper than economics. An entire generation had learned that paper wealth could vanish overnight, that institutions could lie, that the government couldn't be trusted. This suspicion of banks, of paper money, of credit itself, it would haunt France well into the 19th century. And there was one more consequence, perhaps the most profound. The Mississippi bubble convinced the French elite that economic innovation was dangerous, that finance was inherently corrupt, that tradition and stability were safer than experimentation. Meanwhile, across the Channel, Britain was learning the opposite lesson. The ghost in the machine. The Mississippi bubble collapsed in 1720. Exactly 303 years later, in 2023, Silicon Valley Bank failed in a bank run triggered by social media. Depositors, spooked by rumors of insolvency, withdrew $42 billion in a single day, all via smartphone apps and digital transfers. The bank collapsed in less than 48 hours. The technology was different. The psychology was identical. John Law's great innovation wasn't the printing press or the joint stock company. Those already existed. His innovation was the realization that money is fundamentally a social technology. It works not because of the metal it's made from or the paper it's printed on, but because people believe in it. This insight forms the bedrock of modern central banking. When the Federal Reserve conducts quantitative easing, purchasing trillions in government bonds with newly created money, it's using Law's playbook. When the European Central Bank sets negative interest rates, it's manipulating the same psychological levers. When China's central bank targets GDP growth by expanding credit, it's executing Law's vision with digital precision. The difference is supposed to be control. Modern central banks have learned from Law's mistakes. They move slowly. They communicate carefully. They maintain reserves and regulatory frameworks. They try to deflate bubbles gradually, rather than letting them pop catastrophically. But do they succeed? In 2008, the global financial system nearly collapsed when complex mortgage securities, paper assets backed by real estate, turned out to be worthless. Trillions in wealth evaporated. The response? central banks created more money, on a scale that would have made John Law blush. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet expanded from $900 billion in 2008 to $9 trillion by 2022. That money flowed into asset markets. Housing prices doubled, stock indices tripled. Cryptocurrency markets appeared from nowhere and soared into trillion-dollar valuations. A new word entered the lexicon, one John Law would recognize: meme stocks. Shares that rise not because of underlying value, but because people believe others will pay more. GameStop, AMC, Dogecoin, NFTs selling for millions. The Mississippi Company sold shares in fictional gold mines. We sell shares in companies that have never turned a profit. Law convinced France that Louisiana was paradise. We convince ourselves that digital tokens representing cartoon apes are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The instruments have evolved. The psychology hasn't. And here's the uncomfortable truth. John Law's system worked for 4 years. It provided liquidity, stimulated growth, and reduced France's debt burden. It failed not because the theory was wrong, but because it scaled too quickly and couldn't be sustained. Modern central banking is the Mississippi system with better brakes. But the fundamental question remains: how much of our wealth is real, and how much is collective belief? When we look at retirement accounts, property values, stock portfolios, what portion is backed by actual productive capacity, and what portion is paper built on faith? We know the answer. We just don't like to think about it. Because if we did, we might realize we're all still living in John Law's world. We've just gotten better at pretending we're not. The pattern repeats. 300 years after John Law fled Paris, we can draw 3 inescapable lessons from his rise and fall. First, money is collective fiction. It works because we agree it works. The moment that agreement fractures, whether in 1720 Paris or 2023 Silicon Valley, the illusion collapses with terrifying speed. Second, innovation in finance is a double-edged sword. Law's paper money and credit systems eventually became the foundation of modern prosperity. But in their first iteration, they destroyed countless lives. Every financial revolution carries within it both liberation and catastrophe. Third, we are not immune. We tell ourselves we've learned from history, that our regulations and institutions make us different. But from the Dutch tulip mania, to the 2008 financial crisis to the cryptocurrency boom and bust, the pattern repeats with metronomic regularity. The technology changes. The human psychology doesn't. John Law died believing his system had failed because it wasn't given enough time, enough scale, enough faith. He never accepted that the failure was inherent to the design. We might ask ourselves, what systems are we living within right now that will seem as obviously doomed to our grandchildren as the Mississippi Company seems to us? What bubbles are we inflating, convinced this time is different? Because in the world of wealth and power, history never ends. It just changes hands. And somewhere, right now, a brilliant mind is designing the next system that will convince millions that prosperity can be conjured from belief, until the day it can't. If you enjoyed uncovering this hidden chapter of history, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to The Wealth Timeline, and turn on the bell icon. Because the next story might just rewrite what you thought you knew about power.